recording, Festival. We're here with Noren. Ricky, how are you this morning, sir?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
It's Sunday morning. I'd be asleep if I wasn't doing this.
Same here. Well, maybe not. I got to work it a little bit. So,
Ricky, give us your bona fides. All your amazing creativity, and you do a lot of stuff. So lay it out on the line for us.
big ones like past 5 years, professional wrestling. Uh, from I'm a hybrid wrestler, so it's like just regular wrestling, deathmatch wrestling. Various performances from there. I used to do the Renaissance Review Show, which is kind of like sketch comedy and improv put together in wrestling. Used to do improv comedy and stand-up, and I have an art degree, so a whole bunch of stuff kind of mashed into one,
But you also work in the culinary industry.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Don't you do some music on the side?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So your creativity, like there is no boundaries. It just expands out.
Mm-hmm. If I want to do something, I figure out how to do it. That's pretty much it,
So when you're looking at how to focus that, because I got to think that can sometimes be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like ideas going nonstop. How do you focus in? How do you bring kind of that wide spectrum of idea into focus to get at least a version of what you want out of it?
It starts with, for me, it's taken years to realize that inspiration can come from anything. And like, say if I want to think of something to do for a wrestling promo, I don't have to like watch wrestling promos. I can just, walk down the street, hear a song or see something, and it'll spark an idea. So for that, it's just kind of when I get locked up, I try to just kind of loosen up, get a cup of coffee, and just put on a song I like, and just kind of get myself into a mode where I'm just kind of absorbing everything without any bias, just kind of like taking things in. And that leads to ideas.
For you, when you go through your creative process, is it more like jazz to where it's just like you're pulling and improvising and while there's form and structure, it's so loose you can go anywhere? Or do you at some point settle in and more like a writer plot things out and put more of a hard line structure in place to build off of?
It definitely starts like jazz. I'd say so. And a lot of that is just the improv background. Where I learned there's certain techniques with improv where you can take a subject and you kind of figure out where you can branch from it. So I'll take an idea and I'll just mess around with it for maybe like a good half hour. And then from there, once I find structure, then we go into like, building a skeleton or something and getting something more solid down.
Do you feel like having that more solid structure still gives you enough room to manipulate things in order to, if the mood hits you or if a creative spark hits you, you're able to kind of adjust? Or do you find that having that structure, then you have to repeat the process to continue to narrow it down to build something that you can do cohesively almost in your sleep?
Yeah, I'd say, well, the process, I say the improvisation process I start with never ends because I've had projects where I thought I was close and then I blew up the whole thing. But there's also like things where I was just, if something's really structured and I get stuck, a lot of times I might set to the side for a little bit, then come back to it. Like I get an insane amount of like Google Drive documents where like each one has a different idea, and it's just I'll leave that. I have ideas that are like at least 4 years old that I might come to here eventually, especially since I got a new gimmick,
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that. Tell us about where that transition came from, because I love the Renaissance Ricky Noren gimmick you were doing because it incorporated so much of you, and like you were even using your paintings at times, which was brilliant. How do you transition then into Reverend Ricky Noren?
Well, it kind of started with Well, a lot of people know this. I grew up in a very strong evangelical kind of like, or non-denominational kind of home. Or my home wasn't too bad, but I went to a youth group that really kind of indoctrinated me in high school. So that's always stuck with me. I never talked about it much, but it was something that's always been on my mind creatively that I wanted to bring in, like partly a satire, because there's so much messed up shit going on in this country. And I'm like, I'd like to bring that into a character. So last year I did a promo for a pro wrestling train wreck because they had a deathmatch Armageddon match. So I did like a Jack Van Impe kind of promo, and everyone liked it a lot, and some people throwing out ideas like, oh, you should be like an anti-deathmatch preacher or something like that, blah, blah, blah. And then it was last November, the end of last November, I kind of hit a rut, and I decided to take a break from wrestling. And I was just messing around, and all of a sudden all these ideas started popping in, like, what if the Renaissance became the Reverend? And I did like some kind of angle where I go crazy. And then I build on this, take the time during my break to build layers on this character, kind of like doing an improv scene. And that's kind of where it came from. And I was able to draw from my past to make this villain.
During that break, did it give you time? Because one of the things you do better, I think, than a lot of other people is you take social media and you build in social media. I mean, It's right there. You're laying the building blocks. Is that a place where you can also kind of test run some things and then make adjustments on the fly? Or is that somewhere where you're like, I've already got the idea and it's time to roll?
It's honestly both. I'll have posts where I know they're gonna work, but also like I'll test run little things, and if it doesn't work out, like it's still something I put in the context of the character. Even if it's like if an idea fails with a character, just justify with think about what your character would say to justify that, because this new character is a huge hypocrite. So whatever I say, I can just backtrack on it,
Yeah, that's a fascinating concept, to me, I never really thought of that. Yeah, especially for character writing and building for me, it's games generally, but that's great. I never thought about that. If I'm a liar, it doesn't matter because I'm always lying. So do you find, and you do an awful lot of travel, you're not just in the metro of Minneapolis, St. Paul, you're kind of out and about on the road. When you're on those long car rides, making those towns, is that a good place to have the sounding board of fellow wrestlers you're traveling with, but as well just kind of that, like we were talking about driving to Grand Forks and it's how it's kind of a boring ride. Is that a good place to, continue to solidify ideas or to refine them in your head and also have a sounding board right there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times, like, you have no choice. You're so bored, you got to do something, I usually bring a notebook on or something like that. And just you're there with other people that you did a show with. So not only can you talk about the match you just did, you can talk about new ideas you got. I workshopped a ton of stuff in the car. We'd be like, I'm looking around like, hey, what do you think of this? Blah, 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 with this,
In your other creative avenues, do you have the same thing where you have relationships built with folks who you trust for them to give you not just positive feedback, but strong constructive feedback, like in music and culinary art, in your painting, improv especially?
Yeah. Obviously in the culinary world, because I don't have a culinary degree, so like I always try to go to places where I'm surrounded by good chefs and stuff like that. Improv, I was involved with a really good group and had a bunch of really good coaches. I took classes, I think like 3 different sets of classes, so there was a lot of really good like positive reinforcement of like your creative style and a great just like really constructive criticism, like really good constructive criticism that allowed you to kind of not feel broken down, but you got to take something and grow from that.
Do you think that having a collective or a group of folks that you can bounce those ideas off, that it helps your process? And if it doesn't help your process, does it at least help your motivation to continue to create?
Yeah. Absolutely. I have. I got a lot of random people that I'll hit up for ideas and stuff if I feel like it. Some people are just friends. Some people are collaborators. Uh, That's interesting because there's sometimes where I have ideas that people don't get, so I might guard them a little more. And I'll like. There's been stuff I've done with my character where I was like, should I send this to workshop it with somebody, or instead I'll just send it out and see what happens. And then after that, I'll get criticism from them. So it's a weird balance with that, you know.
I know you've done like you had your own faction when you started out. Was it easier to work in that group dynamic and be creative as a small contingent, or like an improv crew, or is it easier for you to work on the peripheral of a group and still maintain that fiercely independent creative style?
I'd say on the peripheral most of the times, especially in wrestling. Like I've worked with so many people that are like younger than me, older than me, come from different backgrounds. So a lot of times I try to explain ideas, and people don't quite get it because they just haven't, experienced as much as I have. So I have to adjust accordingly to make things work. But I'm fine with that. I always try to keep a little creative chunk to myself. A lot of that's just like my own character, Like I don't let people step on me.
Do you find it easier to have a huge expanse of idea and then narrow it as you go, or to have like a very narrow kind of build for the audience you think you have, and then allow it to open up as you go, as they're able to, for lack of a better term, process and take more from what you're doing?
I'd say the first is how I approach ideas on my own. The second is what I do when I go to a wrestling show, when I have a match, because like we got to analyze the crowd, the room, things like the ring. Does the ring suck? There's a lot of crappy rings out there. That's going to limit what I can do during the match. So honestly, most wrestling matches, like I'm only given like this much, and I have to work within those confines, which is fine. We figure it out.
So I would ask you too. I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the confines widen the more it goes from a straight wrestling match to a death match.
Mm-hmm.
How do you look at all that potential chaos and plunder, and especially pace, because generally those matches are paced vastly different,
Mm-hmm.
and then build within that and really make it your own?
Deathmatch wrestling, I love the creativity of it. I usually try to make my own weapons and stuff like that, especially if it's a company I work for on a regular. It's weird. There's been shows I've gone to where they have a bunch of weapons I don't like and stuff like that, but we figure out how to do it. But I like to get in situations where I can create my own environment as much as possible, because not only can I work at my own pace, but also I can put together something that's creative and has an interesting story. Because that's one thing I'm really interested with wrestling is like I don't just want to be an interesting character. I want to have matches that are stories that are interesting to watch. Like I'm less invested in moves. I'm more like in deathmatch wrestling. It's like I want to create. I want aesthetically beautiful and functional weapons. Because honestly, I want people to look at like a Ricky Noren deathmatch and be like, "Oh, that looks really good. That clearly has a stamp on it." And that kind of comes from like working in the culinary world, where it's like, "Oh, that dish clearly was plated well, and it's from this restaurant, and they won a James Beard Award." So it's like deathmatch wrestling. It's like people don't realize how creative you can be with it. It's really limitless. I love it.
When you're building that story within such a one thing that deathmatch wrestling I think always has, like you're saying, it's visually striking.
Yeah.
Unless you're working kind of that crazy work rate, big move after big move after big move that sometimes kind of kills an actual story. When you're doing that style of deathmatch wrestling, how do you look at it as being able to continually build the story to a climax where you feel like not only did you get across the story of your collaborator or collaborators, but also were able to get across what you wanted to get across in your ongoing narrative?
It's a combination of variables for that. Because the first thing you do is what I do. When I go to the venue, I scope out the venue, try to get a feel for the crowd. Like I said, check the ring, check the weapons, and then from there we decide like what we can build on. And if it's someone I'm working with, like if it's a big match and someone I know, I might talk to them beforehand and we'll talk ideas and shit. If it's someone that sometimes you go on the road and you work with someone you've never met, just got to figure out in half an hour. Even then, it's just like I'll try and soak in as many variables as I can of the environment, and then I'll figure out what to add to that person I'm working with. And like ideally, like I'd like to control as many variables as I can to stitch together that great story, but sometimes you don't have that control. So a lot of it's just kind of just with years of experience, I've kind of learned to, in order to preserve my character and what I want to do, I know when to hold back in those situations and when I need to go hard. So it's kind of it's like a juggling act almost. It's like you gotta figure out. It's like you gotta hold all these pieces together and make it work for people. And also this humility involved with it too. Sometimes, like some people just want to get 20 minutes all the time, do a 20-minute match, and it'll just be the banger on the card. Sometimes that's not your role, I've had matches where it's like we're doing 8 minutes, we're doing 5 minutes, and that's what's going to make the audience happy and make them remember me.
I was going to say, is it a huge difference in building a match with someone like Oren Veit, who you've known for a very long time, and someone like Schlack, who you didn't really know that well to begin with, but you were in a big match with him?
Yeah. So like with Schlack, like when it's like a bigger name, or not just in deathmatch wrestling, like when I worked with D'Lo Brown, it's I try to take their advice as much as possible. It's like if I'm jumping into someone else's pool, I'll take as much in as I can, just out of respect, but also like just wanting to learn stuff. Because like it's pretty obvious what my character is, and I've worked heel 90% of my matches, so usually I'm heel. So it's like, all right, what do you want to do? Blah blah blah, and I'll just be a dickhead. With Oren, he's somebody I worked with a lot, and he's always been good at pushing my boundaries. So he's one of the people when I work with him, I always try to do something different, because then I can get that immediate feedback, because someone I've wrestled 10 times or maybe more.
Yeah. So how do you take those creative steps, or I'm trying to think of a process, and then translate them into other creative endeavors you have? Because I'm sure there's kind of some transfertive properties between all of the creative endeavors you involve yourself in.
Yeah. For me, getting my mind and body prepared to be creative usually starts with like a day like today, where I'm just having some water and some coffee and just setting my mind right to just produce content. Right, I don't know, content, whatever, produce art, whatever you want to call it. So I get a lot of ideas when I'm at working in a restaurant, because I got to put together plates and stuff like that, cooking stuff and all the different cooking techniques you try. It's weird. Things like creative things that I do in one thing always inspire creative things in the other. I don't know if it's just something in my mind, but like I could be cooking a burger and it's caramelized really well, and all of a sudden I'll get an idea for wrestling. So just they kind of weave into each other, because I think it's just the same thought process, when I'm like on that wavelength, it's like my mind's kind of considering all the possibilities that I could do with art.
How do you keep kind of that creative continuity? I know, especially with wrestling, where you're traveling and you're working a lot of different places, and you work somewhere you may never go back to, or you work places where you're back every weekend, how do you keep that continuity of character or long-term storytelling, which I know you're a fan of, going in a place, especially like a place like Time Bomb?
Yeah, social media is big on that. That's a little gift. I always say like social media, it's the best and the worst thing we've ever had. As far as like the internet, because like there's a lot of idiots and fucking spammers and shit. But like, I wish more people in wrestling realized the capabilities of like dedicating your Twitter to having it to your character, and just putting out stuff, putting out content, plugging shows, helping people get to know the character. So that's really the big thing there is like going out to Milwaukee and stuff like that. I don't see these people very often, but they know where to find me. And I'll put out a promo. I'll start badgering at people on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. So they instantly know who I am. And I put on my graphics and like my logos and stuff. So once they see me, they know to boo me,
Just priming the pump.
Yeah, they always want to boo me too.
Do you find that when you're putting together those outside projects together, when it comes to wrestling, which is something you've done like from the very beginning? I mean, when you guys were the Firm, you started out like right out the gate. It's super funny to go and watch how polished you were from that point and just got more polished. But now someone like Riley Jackson, those first couple things are hard to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And how that was a platform that allowed him to grow, to an incalculable level with his promo abilities.
Yeah.
Are those small take events for you where you're like, I can do this in 1 or I can do this in 3? Or are they things that you agonize over as far as 5, 10, 20, 25 times to get what you want out of it?
I'm not big on the takes because it comes from the improv background where I used to, like right when I got out of art school, there were so many paintings I worked on too long, and then I ended up ruining them when I should have stopped. And that's a lot of artists need to realize. You just need to stop sometimes. I'm a big fan of 1, 2 takes because I'm producing so much content in wrestling right now. Like, I want to have those mistakes because those mistakes might lead to something that you didn't even think about. It's like a Jake the Snake when he comes up with the DDT, just fucked up a move and that's his finish. Things like that. It happens in the culinary world all the time. You drop a cake and all of a sudden you have a Michelin star like Massimo Bottura. I think you keep the takes down and embrace imperfection. As long as you get across the idea in your character, that's good enough. You don't need to perfect every word on the promo. You don't need to, as long as the idea comes across, that's the most important thing,
So it is more about the idea rather than the actual content that's coming out. It's about eliciting emotion rather than kind of eliciting thought.
Yeah. Because I've had promos where like I planned out every word, I've written it out, and they were great, but they don't resonate as well as the ones where there's more emphasis on generating emotion, and I'm just more relaxed.
Do you find that is what part of your creative background do you think that approach kind of manifested, and then it became kind of your go-to? Hey, Shaggy.
That's interesting. I think a lot of it came like 10 years ago. I was doing stand-up pretty heavy, and at first I was like writing jokes and like trying to do all these open mics, and it just didn't feel right. And then like 2014, I was going through some BS in life, and I decided I just want to do weird characters and shit. So I did a whole run for about a year where I was like doing all this like kind of Kaufman-esque type stuff on stage, doing these characters, and I found it not only was it more fun and liberating, but I was getting better responses, and it was like I was more in tune with myself. I learned a lot from that. Like I'd go to like Ball's Cabaret at Southern Theater, and I'd just do a 5-minute improvised set. Huge Theater a couple of years ago, I did a solo show. It was like a 24-minute set. I did 3 weeks of that, and from that, I learned like, oh, there's amazing places you can go when you don't have anything.
Just going up and kind of feeling the room, and then
Yeah.
is there a level of for you a level of creative bliss involved in that, and almost like that creative nirvana where you're almost like you're not there, or is it more of a is there a feeling of sheer terror?
I was both. I remember, I can still get nervous. Like, plus, I have an anxiety disorder too, so I got to balance that out. You know, I take medication for that. Like, wrestling's been wrestling. I suffer from this big imposter syndrome, and I've always struggled with my status, even though I'm kind of get to be more senior around Minnesota. But the creative bliss afterwards is amazing. Like, for example, when I did Planet Death last year for GCW, remember, it was a crazy day because the weapons kept changing, and we didn't put the match together till like 15 minutes beforehand, you know, and it was super hot straight out in the sun of Florida. All these variables were just like, ugh, how am I going to put this all together? Plus my anxiety. I remember just before walking through that curtain, like feeling just like, oh, it's this crazy anxiety that like, it's like, I'm trying to compare. The only thing I really compare it to is when I like got in the boot camp, like for the Navy back in 2010. That kind of like, holy shit, I don't know what's going to happen. This is crazy. And I try to remind myself, like, after this is done, you're going to feel amazing because we've been planning this for months and months. And you flew down here, you know, and sure enough, like 4 panes of glass later, I'm sitting in the back and GC Finau hands me a Modelo, and I'm like, all right, we did it, you know.
Do you find it's different to wrestle for events where you know it's going to be broadcast? You know that it's going to be online, you know, in perpetuity. It's there forever. Or for a show where there's, you know, 130 people there who are rabid for that show. But this show isn't going to probably be anywhere else.
I'd say it probably wears the same, you know, because, I mean, the televised stuff, like, you know, you're going to get responses on Twitter a lot of times. But when you have that, like 130 people, like it's big, but it's still intimate. When you have that, you know, you're going to meet people after the show and they're going to tell you what they thought and stuff like that. So I'd say they're about equal to me.
It's interesting. What about commentary?
Commentary doesn't scare me as much. I think it's because it comes in line more with my comedy background, and that I don't have to worry about. One of the biggest insecurities I have about wrestling is just remembering spots and like being at the right place in the right time. You know, with that, it's like I don't have to worry about all that physical stuff. And for me, it's just like I'm just talking about what I see. You know, just like doing an improv scene. I'm observing and I'm responding.
Yeah, I find with commentary, it's color is way easier than play-by-play.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you forget the name of a move, it'll haunt you.
Yeah.
I might as well wear a shirt that says Finley Roll on it because I'm
Mm-hmm.
still kicking myself from something 4 years ago of not remembering a Finley Roll, and I was so pissed off for the rest of the show. So it's, yeah, because it's especially with I think with commentary and getting fortunate enough to listen to you do a Time Bomb show and do the commentary on a big stage. I think one of the most impressive things it was how quick you were, and how you were. There was never a moment where there was any flub or any or anything like that. It was just really sharp, and I know how hard that is to continue that dialogue while watching something and commenting directly on the content of it. It's not easy.
Yeah, it's you definitely have to be a little bit caffeinated and just focus. You really have to focus and just be in the moment. It's really fascinating. Like once you're in the zone, like once you get going, it's fine. Like the first match is like trying to get the wheels moving. Plus, the guy I was doing commentary with, we've never worked together yet, but I knew him, so we had to kind of like find each other's style. And plus, like, Minoru Suzuki's at the show, and you're like, fuck this up.
I was going to say, on top of all that, Minoru Suzuki. I would say too, how does that work for you mentally when like when you're wrestling or when you're creating other content? There's a lot of it that's about you. How does that work when you're like commentary is pretty much about everybody but you?
I think, like, with me, like, people know who I am, so I can spew out a few Jesse Ventura isms, but I don't know. It's everybody's got their own way of doing things, and as long as you're not stepping on anyone's toes as far as like what people are doing in the ring and taking away from the show, like you can do your own stuff, Why don't you just? Yeah.
I would say again, I thought that was why one of the reasons it was so good was at no point, even kind of getting those jabs in, it was natural, because at no point did it shift the attention away from the stories you were assisting to be told that were in the ring or that were being told over a long span of time. And that's one reason, again, it was so good. How is that just a form and function, do you think, of your creative collective storytelling process?
I think so. Yeah, it's all encompassing. I mean, having to put together so many stories in the ring, like for me to like, I have a lot of friends that are interested in what I do, but they've never been to a show, so I have to explain it to them. So when I was doing commentary at Time Bomb, I'm thinking like, how could I try and explain this to somebody who's watching for the first time and doesn't understand what's going on? And then when I'm like, what should I say? I'm like, oh no, what would I say to myself when I'm putting the match together? What would I want people to see? And I think about, okay, that's what I should talk about, what they're in the match, like give some backstory,
And there was some chaotic stuff on that show.
Oh God.
There was some wild stuff on that show. Where do you find probably your most consistent and most gone to creative well that you draw from?
It's interesting. I'd say
something you can just go back to repetitively and it feels bottomless in what it can give in return.
One of my improv coaches, John Tatatios, once told me, establishing a character, think about I want, I need, I feel. I want, I need, I feel. 3 things. I'd say that's a big one. Whenever I get in a situation where I'm doing a promo or something like that, or in a match, like I want, I need, I feel. What does my character want? What does my character need to do? How does my character feel? I'm going to bring that up.
Are you able to apply those same principles to plating, to painting, to even to music?
Yes.
How do you make that transition using that same philosophy to those different mediums?
Well, you have a personal attachment to every piece of art you're making, whether it's food or painting or wrestling. So you got to analyze, how do I feel and how's that going to affect the brushstrokes I'm slapping on here. I'm having a really crappy restaurant shift. We're in the weeds. Like, how do I feel and how can I fix that to make my plating better? You got to, the well is yourself. You got to draw from yourself, People talk about, you got to find your own voice. It's like, you don't need to find it. It's already there. I want, I need, I feel.
When you look at that, is there, beyond that kind of internal, is there a muse you find, or is that an ever shifting symbol that you can draw from anywhere?
It's ever shifting. It comes from all over the place. Like music helps a lot. Just putting on like whatever song I'm into. Like I'm really into Hungry Heart, like Bruce Springsteen right now, so I'll pop that on. But that changes. Sometimes I'll go to the MIA and look at some paintings. Go to the gym and kind of clear my mind.
Do you find, because I think this is always interesting, where you have let's say a song, and for 3 months it's the starting point for creativity, and then either that dries up or one day it's a different song. do you find when you come back to that a year later, 2 years later, it elicits something completely different, or that it elicits an evolved form of that creativity based on all those in-between experiences?
It evolves. It still keeps the original quality, but there's more that I toss onto it. Especially if I was listening to that song to execute an idea that was successful, because then I'm like, oh, okay. It reminds me of the process and encourages me to continue a new process. It worked out, so let's keep going.
Is it more that, and this is, I think, an interesting concept, is music an easier thing to draw from because of its concise nature, and because a lot of the creative things that you're doing on a more often basis are concise in nature than, say, a film or a book, where it's more of a time investment? And what, like with wrestling especially, like you said, you're on a clock. Like, this is my time. I got to do it in this time.
Mm-hmm. Music for me is great because I can still visually observe things. Like just headphones on and boom. And for me, like I'm big on like visual things, and like just because I've always like, it goes back to art school, just being fascinated by colors and lines and textures of paint. So I get like some people don't understand abstract art like Jackson Pollock, but for me it's like those paintings convey energy, and I get so stimulated just like looking at them. And the great thing about music is that I don't have to lose that. I can plop on Springsteen, and combine the both.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. So you combined improv and wrestling at one point. Are there other things you would like to be able to weave in and form kind of that hodgepodge of creative energy? Because those Renaissance shows were great.
I always like mashes stuff together. I don't know if like there's any kind of big concept I would like to do right now. Like the Renaissance review shows, I think like inherently combine all sorts of mediums, and like thinking about like bringing back that concept, like because I mentioned to you earlier, like I'm thinking about doing that show with the new character, like you said, like revival style. So
I think that would be spectacular.
There's so much we could do with like music and stuff, and even art, like so those live painters, they have at churches that paint Jesus in like 30 minutes,
I can't remember what I was watching where they were. Oh, it was a comedian, and for his touring shows, he brings an artist who is drawing constantly on stage throughout the openers and everyone. And they kind of have a Q&A afterwards, and she talks about like what she was drawing, and they kind of use it as a foundation as well to tell additional just improvisational jokes. But also just that you and I were talking about, like, revivals are an extremely energetic place, but they can be an extremely frightening place.
Absolutely.
So there's a strange confluence of energy there that you can do a lot of things with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because like we've all watched shows with movies with revivals, but like a live show, if I can cultivate that energy in a constructive way, like I don't want to. It's a comedy show. I don't want to make people. I want to make people uncomfortable, but in a good artistic way. But
when you're creating it, is there a part of you that says, "I want people to try to even in comedy to walk, or even in plating, to walk away and at least have a part of their brain ask why?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I like it when I consume some media and like I enjoy it, but there's always something that's kind of like, huh? That's always stuff that stuck with me. Like first listening to like the Ramones and stuff like that. Like, why do they look like that? Why do they sound like that? You know, like if you can put a little thing in there that makes people think, they're gonna remember you more. They're gonna remember it more, and hopefully you'll inspire them. You know.
Well, also I think for the things that you do that are an ongoing narrative, having that having someone have to wait and try to figure out what that next step is, ending on that cliffhanger. Do you find that is an effective tool in your different modes of creativity, or is it something that, because sometimes you're delivering this is a beginning to end finished consumable item, consume, the story is here?
Man, I always like to leave a little bit open at the end in case I want to come back to it. But also, I feel like stories are just kind of meant to be that way because nothing truly ends. Like, we all know the hero's journey. Like, I don't know. Like, it goes back to, like, I don't like achieving perfection. I like achieving excellence, you know? I feel like having a solid, like, front to end story, it's like you're trying to be perfect. It's like, no. Like, just have a plot hole, you know? Why not? Because then you can come back to it. It might bring you something even greater, honestly.
Do you subscribe to that idea of hero's journey?
Yeah, I like it. It's the basis for a lot of comedy writing I do and stuff like that. Or Dan Harmon's story circle. It's a good way to start. And eventually you learn ways to mess with it, you know. That's where I'm at right now.
The subversion of expectation.
Yeah.
So how does a hero's journey relate to you're putting together like the character you're doing now? Because you're coming from an entirely different end of the spectrum. How do you subvert that hero's journey and still give agency and still give journey to that individual who is, inherently only heroic in their own mind?
Mm-hmm. Well, you think about two aspects, like the heroic journey in their own mind, because this guy's like he's a prophet or whatever. So in his own mind, he's going on his own journey. And he interprets the world a different way. And outside of that, you create the other hero's journey, which is like an anti-hero's journey, where you flip everything around, and this person, is going to like blah 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 blah, eventually like reach a downfall, come out as something completely changed. I don't know when that's gonna be, but it's a balancing act really of just what this person's going to expect of the world and what the world really is. It's like you live in a cult, you're fucking David Koresh living in a compound. You don't really know what's going on, like you're so locked into your own self that you've kind of lost touch with reality, like Charles Manson, So you have to kind of combine their reality and outside reality in that journey and have them kind of interweave. Where the heroes, the hero goes through that big struggle. I see the villain's journey as more like that's the prosperity, and that's when they're hitting it really well. It's like the inverse, It's like, oh yeah, I'm perfect, I got 100 followers, I'm getting all this money, blah 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 blah, and then boom,
That's it. I always have such a hard time wrapping my head around the concept of the hero's journey from the perspective of a villain who knows they're a villain, as opposed to a villain who is justified in their own mind that everything they're doing is correct, rather than someone who's like, oh, I know full well that I am doing something truly awful, and I'm just doing it for the sake of awfulness.
This character is interesting because it's based so much on people from my past who meant well, but they were so indoctrinated that like this was their life, and any like little question in their mind of like, could this be wrong? They had to snuff out because I've been too deep.
Yeah.
Like the Reverend character I view is like Obviously, he doesn't think that he's a bad guy, but he knows the world thinks he's a bad guy. But that just reinforces his beliefs because it's like, oh, I'm just being persecuted like Christ, you know?
And even you were talking about how like hypocritical that can be.
Mm-hmm.
How do you eliminate like that part of your brain when you're doing something like that? It's just like, no, I'm not hypocritical at all. How do you just kind of shut off and subvert that reality?
Mm, I think like with this character, it helped. Like, I created a temple of like the church thing. At first, it's like it's almost approaching it like I'm going crazy, almost like what would I do in this situation? Like what if I went back to my church in high school? So I eventually realized, oh, I need to start, and that goes back to what we were talking about, using social media to throw out ideas and try things out. And I throw out just some fake, sizzler for a church, and I'm like, oh, that's perfect. And I found people are grabbing onto the culty stuff. So that kind of snowballs and helps me establish the reality of the character.
Yeah, I think this, especially where you're going with this, is so fascinating because there's so many directions it can go in. Do you see an end game in sight for it, or is it just so early that you have just endless possibilities in front of you?
I feel like there's endless possibilities right now. I guess the end game is like me going back to the Renaissance character because it's still a part of this character's history, you know. I know that the character has a lot of potential in Deathmatch Wrestling to be a top heel. And it's just a matter of me marketing that and getting to the right people because I feel like a lot in independent wrestling, there's still too many people that want to be a cool heel instead of being an actual villain. And we need actual villains to make heroes. And that's how you make the most money, you know?
Do you look at kind of that ongoing saga as having those stages beyond the Renaissance and beyond the Reverend? Is there some idea in the back of your mind germinating to where you can see like, oh, there's a third incarnation of this, or a fourth, or a fifth?
Yeah. I'm already thinking, because I don't know, like I've thought about having both characters at the same time, but I'm also like starting to realize that the Renaissance is not going to be the same character, when it comes back, if it comes back. So I'm already thinking like, how are these going to evolve? I mean, the Reverend character's already evolved and hasn't even had a match yet, which is really fascinating to see. And kind of boom, 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 boom. I ain't going to give too much away, but there's some events coming up where the Reverend might show up, and it's going to be elevated. Or improv, we say heighten. You're just heightening everything. It's a constant process.
So how do you handle the potential of either creative stagnation or creative boredom? Like you've done something for a while and you're like, oh, I'm kind of bored with this. How do you deal with that?
When it comes to that, I try to, just leisure, like take a break, try and do something I enjoy, and just completely like eliminate the concept of creating art. That's really what helps me because I've had a little bit of that this week. And like for breaks, like a couple weeks ago, I went and visited my mom for like 5 days, and I was just like, I'm not worried about you. And then automatically when I come out of that, like a cup of coffee, boom, like that creative boredom's gone. Like, well, sparks are coming back.
So it's kind of about creating a certain headspace or even a certain physical space in order to kind of start to manifest those ideas.
Mm-hmm. You have to cultivate your ideal environment for creation.
Speaking of ideal environments, what is Ricky Noren, what is your ideal creative environment?
Mm, I'd say well rested, lately caffeinated, like like a I don't know, like a room that's aesthetically pleasing, I guess. Um, for me, like my favorite times to create are like when I wake up in the morning and I'm super fresh starting my day, and honestly, there's times after like big accomplishments, like with matches, like once I get home off the road, I have trouble sleeping because all of a sudden ideas are popping in my head because of that accomplishment. So those are really the two that I like.
Just having that consistent, constant creative high, which I always think is like the boon and the bane of doing anything creatively. Because when I'm done, it's like, oh, I was rush. That was super rush.
Boom,
But then also afterwards, I'm like, I can think of the 1,000 things I did wrong during that rush. How am I going to go back and fix this from a in my case, a more of a retconning perspective. So, Ricky, thank you very, very much for your time, and especially thank you for all the creative things you put out in the world. Where can people find you in all your different creative endeavors? And where should they be also looking out for new things you're putting out?
I'd say the big ones are at Ricky Noren on Instagram and Twitter, and forget my YouTube handle, but yeah, Ricky Noren on YouTube. I upload all my promos on there and stuff. But like, yeah, Instagram and Twitter is like where you can see the Reverend stuff happening. The kind of weird experiments I'm doing with social media. Check those out.
Do you have any other plans or any events coming up you can let people know about, or is it all still pretty much hush hush?
It's still hush hush. You'll know when it happens, though.
Perfect. Ricky, I know you got to get to work. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, anytime, man. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.
All right. So that was the Renaissance, the Reverend Ricky Noren coming to us. And one of the things is here on Prep School, we're going to be having more and more people come on, and we'll talk about their creative process, what they do, how they do it. I wanted to start off with Ricky because he's awesome and he does so many different things. So it's super cool to see how he interweaves so many different creative endeavors he involves himself in, and he does them all at such a high level. So, yeah, I'm your King Ginger. Tomorrow night down in Outlands. If you were watching last Thursday, sorry, had a little moment, which is sucky when that happened. Which I'm just apparently having now too. The next Thursday, Bad at Games, I think the Big Baby Teasus and I are still going to be playing a little bit of Minecraft. Next Sunday, the 17th, Prep School. I'm going to have Dirk Stanley on, the creator of the Faraway Land RPG, as well as Mere Anarchy. Super, super interesting dude. Great creative mind. I am over the moon to talk to them about how they take all of those things out there and formulate them into not just a cohesive idea, but one that's usable by the community. So, hey, look, everybody gets out of class early. 55 minutes. I want to say thank you to the folks in the chat, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Class dismissed. Bye.